Right, let's bring in Alfirraz Scheers. He's a military and defence analyst joining us from London. Alex, thanks for your time. How far backwards do you think we've gone?
Well, I think we're now in an extremely dangerous situation. Now, the MoU may not be dead, so to speak, but it certainly is on life support. And what it will take to get out of this crisis instability situation now with 4 rounds of escalation is going to be restraint. It's going to be restraint on both sides. And it doesn't look as though either side is willing to exercise that restraint, because the political issue pertaining to the status of the strait is still extremely in doubt. I think the United States find it intolerable that Iran will exercise control over the strait, and Iran finds it intolerable that an alternative mechanism with regards to the control of the strait, without them being the predominant actor in that mechanism, is also equally intolerable. So I think we're in a really dangerous situation here, and the question is whether Iran now will retaliate, because if they do, then we're back in this sort of cycle of perpetual conflict again.
Yeah, so if we have intolerance on one side for the situation, and you're saying we need restraint on the other side, in a tug of war, what is the motivation, or what is going to be pulling us further towards the restraint rather than this intolerable situation that either side feels that they're in?
Well, I think for Iran, again, I think this is a deal breaker for them. I think they are probably willing to return to large-scale conflict if it means that they can continue to exercise control over the Strait of Hormuz, because it's 2 things. It's one, it's the big spoil of the war for them. And secondly, it's also their biggest source of leverage going forward in any negotiation, whether it's based on the MOU or based on some other framework. It is their biggest source of leverage. For the United States, it's the state of the economy, both domestically but also the global economy. But the United States is also under considerable pressure from GCC countries to ensure that the Strait of Hormuz doesn't become de facto Iranian maritime territory. So I think what we need here is for both sides to really contend with the fact that a continued escalation, another round of escalation in the near term, would be in nobody's interest. But the big question here is who is willing to take more hits, who is willing to absorb more pain, and then, of course, as a result of that, who is then willing also to cave in, to concede?
Yeah, help me understand the rather complex picture, if you can, here, because the Strait of Hormuz obviously is the centrepiece, or has become the centrepiece, of negotiating an exit to this war. And yet, when we see these attacks, it is the US bombing or striking Iran. It is Iran conducting air attacks on neighbours. And yet, how does that impact the already complex situation that we see in the Strait of Hormuz? Because that is really what is the leverage in this war.
Yeah, it's incredibly detrimental, because whatever happens, you cannot change the geography of the situation. Iran is a Gulf state. The GCC countries are Gulf states. The United States has significant interests in the Gulf. So, being engaged in this sort of escalatory spiral is certainly going to have an incredibly deleterious impact on the way that Iran and its regional neighbors relate to one another, interact with one another, negotiate. Any kind of future paradigm is really contingent on the fact that you can't change that geography. So this is an incredibly, like I said, an incredibly dangerous situation. But it goes back to the initial problem with regards to the points that the United States put out initially in the beginning of April, or the first week of April, and the Iranian points being in direct tension with one another. And then, of course, that's translated into the MOU. The MOU doesn't stipulate a sequencing order. The MOU has hardly really been adhered to in any meaningful way. And I think that's the problem. The problem is that these two parties still distrust each other enormously. And then, of course, the Gulf powers also distrust Iran enormously. And as a result of that distrust, they're incapable of compromising on anything, really.
And so when we hear President Trump saying already that Iran has called and they want to make a deal, what do you think that even means at this point?
Look, there's an element to this war that's informational. There's an informational warfare dimension to this, and essentially it's to destabilize the other side, the adversary. And Trump likes to play this game on the one hand because he's got an eye on the market, so he likes to manipulate the markets. Certainly, that's how he sees it in his own mind, that he's a master manipulator of the markets, but also that he thinks that by issuing mixed signals that he can keep the Iranians on their toes, so to speak, and maybe sow some divide internally. Now, on the Iranian side, they've been very sort of clear that they won't tolerate threats. That it's stipulated as well in the MoU that both sides should act with a certain degree of decorum when they're signaling their demands to one another. But there's another persistent problem within the Iranian regime, and that is that we're not really quite sure what the IRGC, what commanders like Vahidi, and certainly people close to the Ayatollah, what they actually genuinely want, whether they want to move forward with negotiations or not. And we know that people like Ghalibaf, despite his post on social media today, that people like Ghalibaf and people like Arachi are quite keen for negotiations to go forward. So the United States president, just to go back to your question about how constructive are the president's tweets and how conducive are they to negotiations? Well, not very, because it's hard to predict what the president will actually say, what the president will actually do, never mind what the president actually thinks.
Alfirraz Scheers joining us from London. Thank you very much for your time.